Today it is common to think of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland together as the Scandinavian countries. Sometimes only Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are called Scandinavia, echoing a time in the past when these three kingdoms were joined as one under the Kalmar Union. Even after that union collapsed, Denmark and Norway stayed linked for a long period, followed later by another union between Sweden and Norway. Despite each of these nations having their own culture, people, and languages, and despite them now being fully independent of each other, their history is curiously and deeply intertwined. This raises an important question. Why did they end up united in the first place? What exactly happened to the Kalmar Union, and why did Denmark and Norway remain together for centuries only to eventually split apart in the late Middle Ages? The German Hanseatic League had grown into a powerful commercial confederation dominating trade throughout Northern Europe. This rising dominance put the smaller Scandinavian kingdoms at risk and led to the idea that perhaps they would be stronger if united. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, which at the time also included much of modern Finland, began to discuss the possibility of forming a union. The reasoning was simple. Alone, each kingdom was vulnerable to German power, but together they might balance the scales. At first, the idea was not popular. Many nobles and rulers worried that their own influence and freedom would be threatened by being tied to neighbors who might not share their priorities. Fate, however, would soon intervene. The daughter of the Danish king Margaret married King Håkon VI of Norway, who also briefly ruled Sweden. When Margaret's brother died, leaving Denmark without a male heir, the door opened for her son Olaf to be put forward as the next Danish king. She also insisted that Olaf should be recognized as the rightful heir to the Swedish throne, even though Håkon had recently been driven from power there. When Håkon himself died in 1380, Olaf inherited Norway's crown as well. Suddenly, the dream of uniting the three kingdoms under one ruler seemed within reach. Olaf, however, died tragically young at only 16 years old, leaving the thrones empty and the vision of union seemingly lost. But Margaret refused to let it end there. She was declared the rightful ruler of both Denmark and Norway. Soon afterward, the Swedish nobility became fed up with their own unpopular monarch. With Margaret's support, they deposed him and placed her in power. By the early 1390s, Margaret had effectively united the three kingdoms under her rule. In 1396, the Kalmar Treaty formally established what came to be called the Kalmar Union. Each kingdom would keep control of its internal affairs, but foreign policy and economic matters would be managed together by the crown. In theory, this balance gave everyone a measure of autonomy, while still presenting a united front abroad. For a time, the arrangement worked, and the Kalmar Union endured for more than a century. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Many people, especially in Sweden, disliked being tied to Denmark and resented Danish dominance. Over time, these resentments grew stronger. In the early 16th century, they exploded. In 1520, Christian II of Denmark managed through force of arms to claim Sweden's throne and unite the three crowns once again. To secure his rule, he conspired with Archbishop Gustav Trolle to execute dozens of Swedish nobles who might oppose him. Over the course of just 2 days, 82 nobles were massacred in Stockholm. Officially, the killings were justified as punishment for heresy, but to most Swedes they were simply a naked attempt to wipe out opposition. Outrage spread quickly. One of those killed was the father of Gustav Vasa, who soon led a national revolt against Christian II. By 1521, Christian had been driven out of Sweden, and by 1523 Gustav Vasa was crowned king. Sweden was now firmly independent, and the Kalmar Union was dead. Norway attempted to break free as well, but Denmark's stronger military prevented it. From then on, Denmark and Norway were locked together in a dual monarchy, known simply as Denmark Norway. But this new union was destined to face enormous pressures. With Sweden gone, Denmark and Norway found themselves in constant rivalry with their former partner. A string of wars followed, each draining resources and fueling resentment. The first was the Northern 7 Years' War, which broke out in 1563 after a petty quarrel about heraldry. Denmark Norway's King Christian III had added the Swedish coat of arms to his own. Sweden's Erik XIV retaliated by placing Danish and Norwegian symbols on his. This squabble escalated into full-scale war that dragged on for 7 years with no real results except for the loss of men and money. Not long after came the Kalmar War of 1611, sparked by disputes over trade and maritime control. This conflict briefly secured Denmark Norway's dominance in commerce, but Sweden managed to win an exemption from paying the sound dues tolls that provided nearly 2/3 of Denmark's income at the time. That victory cut deep. The 17th century brought more disasters. Denmark-Norway joined the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side but was forced out in 1629 after humiliating defeat. Sweden, on the other hand, gained great prestige and expanded its influence. In 1643, Sweden turned its strength against Denmark Norway, launching another invasion. This war revealed a widening split in the Union. Many Norwegians had little interest in more wars, while the Danish crown seemed eager to fight at every turn. Exhausted and unable to resist effectively, Denmark Norway had to surrender territory to Sweden in 1645. The kingdom was literally shrinking. The decline continued with the Dano-Swedish War of 1657 to 1658. Denmark Norway lost even more land, nearly half of what it once controlled. Another war in the 1670s, called the Scandinavian War, did little but waste lives and money. It became clear that the constant conflicts with Sweden were weakening the Union. The final blow came during the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century. At first, Denmark Norway tried to remain neutral, but joined the League of Armed Neutrality as a precaution. Britain, however, interpreted this as hostility and launched devastating attacks on Copenhagen in 1801 and again in 1807. In the second attack, the entire Danish-Norwegian fleet was destroyed or captured. With no navy left, the Union was helpless. Forced into an alliance with Napoleonic France, Denmark Norway gained little and lost much. By the end of the war, the Treaty of Kiel in 1814 required Denmark to hand Norway over to Sweden. The centuries-old partnership was over. Norway tried to declare independence but was compelled into a union with Sweden until finally achieving full independence in 1905. Why did Denmark not fight harder to keep Norway? The truth is that by the early 19th century, Denmark was far weaker than it had been centuries earlier. Its resources were exhausted, its lands diminished, and its people weary of endless wars. Norway, meanwhile, had been growing stronger in its own right. Attempting to resist separation would have been both impractical and self-destructive. Denmark had no choice but to accept the loss. Looking back, the unions of Scandinavia always seemed fragile. The Kalmar Union lasted more than 100 years, yet never overcame local resentment and ended in bloody rebellion. The later union of Denmark and Norway endured longer but was sapped by constant wars with Sweden and by the rise of great powers like Britain and France that dwarfed its strength. In the end, geography, culture, and politics tied the Scandinavian nations together for centuries, but ultimately each was destined to chart its own course as an independent state. The story of these unions is more than a tale of treaties and wars. It is also about how small nations try to survive in a world dominated by larger forces. United, they hope to protect their trade and independence from a Hanseatic League and later from other European powers. Divided, they often suffered, but also developed stronger identities of their own. Today, the Scandinavian nations stand apart, yet they remain connected by deep historical bonds forged in times of both unity and conflict.